Georgia, 1868. The Civil War ended 3 years ago, but the South still felt its pain. In Baldwin County, where cotton fields stretched under the hot sun, stood Sterling Manor. This grand house had marble floors, wide porches, and tall white columns. But most of all, it was quiet. Alexander Sterling owned this house. At 32, he was the richest cotton farmer in 3 counties. He was tall and strong, with gray eyes like storm clouds. He ran his business with an iron fist. Workers got only a nod from him. Business rivals heard few words, but they were final. One morning, he sat at his big wooden desk. Without looking up, he signed a letter and said, "Double the overseer's pay if he delivers by Friday. If not, he's gone." His clerk nodded silently. Nobody talked much around Alexander Sterling. That same morning, a small cart rolled up the gravel path to the manor. Victoria Hayes, 25 years old, sat on its edge. She wore old boots and a worn dress, but her eyes showed quiet strength. Victoria came from a poor family. During the war, her mother got sick. Victoria worked hard to keep her alive. Now she looked at the big mansion and whispered, "Mama, I hope I'm doing the right thing." Inside, Mrs. Eleanor the housekeeper met her. The older woman adjusted her glasses and spoke sharply, "You're here to clean. Nothing more. Speak only when spoken to. Stay out of the master's way. He doesn't like strangers." Victoria nodded silently. She took the bucket and rags without complaint. When the big doors closed behind her, she stepped across the marble floor of a house ruled by silence, wealth, and one man's hidden grief. Alexander Sterling lived by routine. He woke before dawn, drank coffee alone, and rode his horse across the cotton fields all day. He gave orders with few words. The fewer words, the better. But that afternoon, storm clouds gathered. Thunder cracked like cannon fire. Rain chased him home, soaking his coat. He swung open the door and stepped inside, leaving wet footprints. The grand hallway was usually quiet. But now he saw a young woman kneeling on the marble floor. Her back was to him as she polished the tiles. She moved carefully, focused on her work. She didn't hear the door open or his footsteps. Then his voice cut through the silence. "Who are you?" Startled, she jumped up, almost dropping her cloth. "I'm Victoria, sir. The new maid," Mrs. Eleanor said. "I don't care what she said," he cut her off. His eyes studied her, calculating. Something flickered in them, then vanished. "Don't let me find you kneeling in the middle of my hall again." He turned and walked away, his boots clicking on the stone floor. Victoria stood there, cloth in hand, her chest rising and falling. Her cheeks flushed, not with shame, but with defiance. She didn't speak aloud, but she didn't run away either. She bent down, picked up her rag, and went back to work. Above, the storm rolled across the roof. Inside, the silence returned. But something had changed. The master of the house had noticed her. No matter how hard he tried to forget, she had already taken root. The days that followed brought silence, but not the same kind. It was softer now, almost curious. Victoria moved through the manor like a whisper, present but never pushy. She scrubbed steps before sunrise, folded linens with care, and dusted books Alexander hadn't opened in years. Alexander pretended not to notice, but he did. He noticed when she replaced dying flowers by the stairwell. He noticed when the piano bench, untouched for 10 years, sat slightly open as if someone had dared to play it. He noticed the faint scent of lavender soap she left behind. One morning, Victoria entered the study to dust. Alexander wasn't there. The room held secrets like old books hold dust. She moved quietly, her cloth trailing along shelves and desk. Then she paused. An open letter lay on the desk, its edges worn. The handwriting was neat. One name stood out, repeated in elegant loops, Catherine. She didn't mean to read it. She looked away almost instantly. But in that brief moment, something unspoken passed between the words and her heart. She was about to leave when a voice like thunder rolled behind her. "Do you make a habit of snooping?" Alexander stood in the doorway, arms crossed, every inch the cold master of the house. Victoria straightened instantly. No, sir. I was just cleaning. I saw the letter. I didn't mean to pry. His gaze didn't soften. Then don't, he said simply. After a pause, his voice lower. You may dust my house, Miss Hayes, but my past is not among the items to be polished. He stepped past her into the room, ending the moment with finality that stung. That night, Alexander stood by the parlor window, bourbon in hand though he hadn't taken a sip. Rain pressed gently against the glass. Somewhere down the hall, a soft melody echoed, hummed, not played. He knew that voice. The same one that had stood firm beneath his harsh words. The same one that filled the hallways when no one else dared make a sound. He closed his eyes, the humming lingering like a memory. Though he said nothing aloud, the storm behind his ribs began to shift. The next storm came quickly. One moment the air hung heavy with heat, the next, thunder cracked across the cotton fields. Rain battered the windows. Candles flickered. In the drawing room, Victoria moved calmly, lighting lamps along the walls. She worked with quiet skill, though her eyes flicked to the windows with each flash of lightning. She didn't expect to find Alexander there, standing by the dark fireplace, half hidden in amber light. He had entered so quietly that only his coat's movement caught her attention. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he asked, his voice softer than usual, "You're not afraid of thunder?" She shook her head without turning toward him. "Not of thunder, sir." He stepped closer, arms folded loosely, tone laced with quiet curiosity. "Of what then?" She paused, her gaze on the candle flame before answering. "Of silence. The kind that settles in a house where no one speaks unless they have to." That answer caught him, not like a slap, but like a slow breath held too long. He said nothing in return. A sudden gust burst one of the tall windows open. Rain slashed through the air. Without hesitation, Victoria ran to it, trying to push the window closed against the wind. Alexander was at her side in a heartbeat. His hand met hers on the latch. For a moment, they both stood there, pressed close by necessity, eyes locked by accident. The storm howled, but inside a different kind of thunder rose. She felt his breath. He saw the raindrops shimmer on her cheek. Neither moved, neither spoke, not until he blinked hard and pulled back. His voice returned to its usual guarded tone. "Go to bed, Miss Hayes." Though she hesitated, her voice was clear. "Yes, sir." She stepped away, candle in hand, casting shadows behind her. Alexander remained, hand still gripping the window latch, as though holding on to something slipping beyond his reach. The storm passed, but the air in the manor remained thick, not with rain, but with something less visible, more dangerous. Alexander felt it in every hallway. Victoria felt it in every glance. Neither spoke of the moment by the window, but it lingered like smoke after a fire dies. One morning, Alexander stepped onto the second-floor balcony, coffee in hand. He looked down and saw Victoria in the courtyard, her face turned toward the sun, her laugh light and carefree. Standing beside her was James, a newly hired field hand, tall and easy in his smile. James handed her firewood, said something too quiet to hear, and tipped his hat. She thanked him, still smiling. Alexander watched it all in silence, his hand tightening around the cup until the porcelain cracked. Later that day, Victoria passed him in the hall, carrying folded linens. He stopped her with a single low sentence, "Seems you've taken to socializing during work hours." She blinked, surprised. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice polite but tired. He stepped closer, his tone cool. "The field hand, James. Is that where your attention lies now?" There was a pause, heavy, sharp. Her chin lifted slightly as she answered, "He brought firewood." "I said thank you. That's not socializing. It's decency." Alexander's jaw tensed, his voice rising. "It's familiarity. This is not a village dance, Miss Hayes. This is my house." Her voice held steady and clear, "And I work in it. I haven't forgotten my place, Mr. Sterling. But maybe you've forgotten that kindness doesn't cost a thing." A silence deeper than thunder rolled between them. He stared at her, truly stared, not in anger but in some tangled thing he didn't know how to name. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Victoria stood there for a moment, linen bundle pressed to her chest, her breath tight. In the kitchen, she folded the cloths with trembling fingers. Upstairs, Alexander poured a drink he didn't want and left it untouched on the desk. Neither knew exactly what had been said, but both knew something had been wounded. And neither was ready to admit what it was. Days passed. Though the sun rose and chores continued, nothing felt as it had before. The air between Alexander and Victoria had cooled into something brittle, easy to break, impossible to mend with silence alone. She no longer paused near the drawing room. He no longer lingered in the hall. The warmth that once flickered in their shared glances had dimmed to ash. One evening, as Victoria made her way to her room, she heard voices from the study. Alexander's voice, clipped and low. She paused unintentionally just outside the door. Inside, he spoke to a visitor. "I don't care what the staff think," he said. "She's a maid." Nothing more. The words hit her like cold wind. She didn't flinch, didn't cry. But she turned, walked silently back to her room, and began folding her dresses into her canvas bag. Before dawn, she was gone. Her boots echoed softly as she walked through the kitchen one last time, leaving her room key beside a folded note. She paused in the grand hall, glancing up at the portrait of the Sterling family above the stairs, faces stiff, eyes distant. A lineage of proud isolation. She didn't belong here. Not among ghosts. She was halfway down the long drive when Mrs. Eleanor appeared on the porch, arms folded. "You sure about this, girl?" Victoria didn't stop walking, but her voice floated back, quiet and clear. "Yes, m." The housekeeper narrowed her eyes. "He's a hard man, but he's not heartless." Victoria's reply came without hesitation. "No. He just keeps it buried too deep for anyone to reach." And with that, she disappeared down the lane beneath a sky just beginning to turn gold. Alexander found the note sometime near midday. The kitchen felt too still, the house too quiet. He picked up the folded paper with careful hands and read her words, written in neat script. "I was not made for silence, Mr. Sterling. I hope someday you won't be either. Asterisk." He stood there a long time, the note trembling slightly between his fingers. He didn't speak, didn't move. But for the first time in years, he felt. Alexander Sterling had faced failing crops, bloody ledgers, and the slow decay of everything his father had built. But nothing undid him like the quiet that followed Victoria's departure. The manor didn't feel silent anymore, it felt hollow. The scent of lavender was gone. The piano remained closed. The linens on the stair rail were no longer folded just so. He held her note for hours without realizing it, read it again and again. Asterisk, "I was not made for silence, Mr. Sterling. I hope someday you won't be either." Asterisk. He murmured the words aloud like a prayer or a wound. Suddenly the study could no longer hold him. Mrs. Eleanor stood at the front door as he came storming down the stairs, coat in hand, fire in his eyes. She raised one eyebrow, arms crossed. "Well, it's about time," she muttered. He stopped only once to ask, breath tight, "Where did she go?" The old woman didn't hesitate. "The Hayes farm. North Road, just past the willow grove." Then he was gone, mounting his horse with the urgency of a man chasing something more important than pride. The ride was long, the road a blur. He passed fields that once belonged to friends now buried, past homes that bore war's scars. But he didn't stop, not until he reached the edge of a clearing and saw the crooked fence, the weather-worn roof, and the woman he had tried and failed not to need. Victoria stood in the garden, sleeves rolled, her hands dirt-streaked from tending seedlings. She looked up, surprise widening her eyes as he dismounted and walked toward her. He didn't offer a speech. He offered the truth. His voice was low, unsteady. "I've been silent too long about everything. I was taught that feeling made you weak, that letting someone in meant giving something up." She stood still, breathing shallow. He stepped closer, his coat damp with sweat and travel. "But you never asked for anything. You just gave light, laughter, decency. And I didn't know how to hold that." He swallowed hard, then added, "I don't want you back as a maid, Victoria. I want you beside me in that house, in that life if you'll still have me." She didn't speak right away. She only stepped forward, reached up with a soil-streaked hand, and placed it softly over his chest. In the hush of the willow grove, she whispered what he'd been waiting to hear. Then speak more often, Alexander Sterling. Let your house be filled with something other than silence. For the first time in years, he smiled, small, real, and full of everything he'd never dared to say. Spring came to Baldwin County in slow golden waves. The cotton had begun to bloom, shy and white against the green, like hope arriving late but sure. The trees were full again, and the air smelled of rain and something softer, something new. Sterling Manor still stood as grand as ever, its columns tall and white against the sky. But inside, the house had changed. The silence was gone. There was music now, sometimes the soft notes of a piano, sometimes just a hum echoing from the kitchen. The hearth burned warm in rooms once kept cold. And Alexander Sterling no longer passed his days alone. One morning beneath the willow trees where she had once told him to speak, Alexander stood in a pressed coat, a small velvet box in his hand. Victoria walked toward him through the grass, her hair pinned up, the wind playing gently at her skirt. She paused when she saw what he held. He didn't kneel. That wasn't his way. He simply looked at her and said quietly, "You've changed everything, Victoria," without asking for anything in return. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a sky-colored stone set in an old band. "It was my mother's," he said, "but it never felt like it belonged to anyone until now." She smiled, eyes sparkling with something that made his breath catch. "Then put it on me, Mr. Sterling, before you change your mind." He slid the ring onto her finger. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with all the careful reverence of a man who had learned not to rush love, Alexander leaned in and kissed her, not with hesitation, not with apology, but with truth. And so beneath the willow trees that had once heard only wind, two people stood wrapped in each other's silence, this time not cold or empty, but full and whole. The cotton baron was no more. In his place stood a man in love. And beside him, a woman who had taught him how to speak without raising his voice.